Good morning. What up, Dan and Amy? I'll tell you what's up. The November jobs number, 178,000 net new payrolls, to be exact. We're going to talk at the top of the 8 o'clock hour with Fox Business contributor Scott Shellady about that, as well as the things that Trump and Pence have said about their economic philosophy as exhibited by the deal they cut with Carrier to keep that facility, to keep the Carrier facility in Indianapolis from moving to Mexico. But right now, we're pleased to be joined by former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy to talk about the unbelievable but very believable number of murders and general violent crime in Chicago. This just calendar year, 737 murders so far, more than 4,000 shootings. Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy, former, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
So you were the police superintendent for about 3.5 years under Mayor Emanuel. About during those 4 calendar years, about 1,940 murders, 400 to 500 a year. So we substantial violent crime problem going back to pre-Emanuel and continuing on through Emanuel, and now spiking to heights we have not seen in generations. What's happening that that shouldn't be happening? What is not happening that should be?
So, simply stated, we got the murder rate down to 1965 lows in Chicago in 2013 and 2014. We did that through a process that's tried and true of how to police. It's from a playbook that was developed in places like New York and Newark and best practices across the country that we implemented in Chicago. The entire policing profession has been politicized from the top down, from the Department of Justice right down to local elected officials and quote-unquote community leaders, and I use those quotes on purpose. The politicizing of policing is supposedly at the behest of saving black lives, yet at the same time, because of it, more black lives are being lost. The 700-plus murders that have happened in the city this year reflects about 80% African Americans being murdered. So if you think that what we're doing is working, by all means, let's keep doing it. Or we could go back and do the things that we know reduces crime. The anti-police sentiment in this country is causing this to happen. Police-related shootings in the city of Chicago are less than half of 1% of the shootings in this city. And that's not even saying that they're all bad, which is the impression that you get today.
Well, you just mentioned
half of 1%. Mm-hmm. And, this anger that exists is about a societal and an economic gap, a lack of hope, and all those issues that surround poverty, education, and breakup of the family unit. And to blame the police and think that we're going to fix it, it's akin to having a shoulder surgery for a knee injury. It's a subset of a bigger picture. It's been misdiagnosed, and the solutions that are being applied are literally killing people. That's what's happening.
I want to go back to what you just said. You said, quote-unquote, community leaders. Are these posers? Are they exacerbating the situation? What are they doing that's keeping the homicide rate going to all-time highs?
Well, what's happening is, what's not being discussed is the lack of compliance in almost every one of these tragic incidents involving the police and young black men that we see on videotape. Lack of compliance. And that lack of compliance is being legitimized by elected officials, the Department of Justice. I'm even going to throw the media in there. And just to be clear, the police have to do better. The police have to do better. There's no two ways about it. And almost without exception, most of those men did not have to die, almost without exception.
What about what about your former boss? Because you got thrown under the bus after the Laquan McDonald cover-up was unearthed. And your boss then commissioned this Star Chamber led by Lori Lightfoot that concluded that the Chicago police, 12,000 plus strong, nearly half of whom are minorities, the Chicago police officers, are systemically racist, who have little concern for the lives of minority members of the city. That's what the report said. What about Mayor Emanuel's culpability?
Well, look, I think there's plenty of culpability to go around. And, the mayor is in a decision-making position right now, and if those decisions are bringing about progressive change, then it's a good decision. But I don't think that that's what's occurring right now. There's plenty of culpability to go around, and unfortunately, people always ask me what's different about Los Angeles and New York, where if you add up the murder rates, they don't reach the level that Chicago has.
Mm-hmm.
And what's different is they got a plan and they stayed on track. New York had one of the first really high-profile bad incidents in the country with the Eric Garner case, the quote-unquote illegal chokehold. They didn't reverse course. They didn't stop doing what they were doing. They refined their policies, and they stayed the course. We had a process. We had a plan in place. I don't know what the plan is now. I'm not sure there is a plan. And as a result, people are dying. They're dying in record numbers.
Well, right. And I mean, I got to tell you, we're talking to former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy. This is what we get from the people in charge of the state all the time. Here's the response to every systemic problem that we have. It's not as bad as you think. There's plenty of blame to go around, and we're working on it. I find, though, that answer wanting. If you're saying there's something that's going on in New York and L.A., which is not going on in Chicago, clearly there is. You're suggesting there's no discernible plan. That has to stop at the desk of the mayor of the city of Chicago. It has to stop at the city council. It has to stop at the civilian political leadership. The police are not able to do anything that the civilian political leadership doesn't allow them to do. And so why not, in no uncertain terms, call out the civilian political leadership? Why will nobody do that in this city?
That's a great question. And this is something that's kind of been haunting me because as we were setting records in 2013 and 2014, the Black Caucus was calling for my resignation on a weekly basis. And that was very clearly political because I took away some of the juice that they had by not letting them pick their district commanders and have influence in the police department. Professional policing has no place for politics. And I wonder where that Black Caucus is today when their constituents are dying in record numbers. I don't hear them. I don't see them. But at the same time, when we were making progress, and by the way, it was still an unacceptable number that we were dealing with when we were doing better, I don't see the outrage. And I'm curious, where is the outrage? And the fact has to be that somebody's complicit. Because at the end of the day, there's plenty of accountability to go around, but people seem to want to point fingers. I accept my responsibility as the leader of that department, and that's why I ended up getting fired. I accept it, but nobody else seems to accept it. It seems to be a finger pointing. It seems to be saying, we're doing the best we can, as you're pointing out, and the answers just are not the answers that they should be.
Now, you were fired a year ago, I think today or a year ago yesterday, and before you were before you were let go, you said that you had developed some good policing practices, but you didn't have a chance to apply them. What are those?
Well, I never said that I didn't have the chance to apply them. We didn't get all the plan in place. We developed a community relations strategy. Crime reduction and cultural change in policing is a process. It's not a light switch that you turn on. It's not a fairy dust that you can sprinkle on something and make it all better. It's a process, and that process was well underway. We had best practices that were being replicated across the country. As a matter of fact, the Department of Justice took what we were doing and had other departments coming to the city to learn what we were doing in Chicago, that very same Department of Justice that is now investigating the patterns and practices of the Chicago Police Department. So we were well down that road. All we had to do is stay on track. And when you reach rough waters, you don't just abandon ship. What you do is you refine what you're doing, you make it appropriate, and it's a process. So that's where we were. I don't know what those processes are now. I don't see much of a plan. I don't see much of a crime strategy. I think that we're seeing a political strategy and a communication strategy, and it's failing miserably. Although I'm referring to the crime strategy, the political and the communication strategy, I can't really speak to because I don't hear the outrage, which means that maybe that strategy is in fact succeeding.
How much of the paperwork issue, the documentation issue, is to blame for the precipitous decline in the number of police stops? I mean, it's like a 10% of what it was last year, and thus by extension, the lack of proactive policing because of the. I know it's not a lack of desire, but the lack of, I think, at the rank and file level, the lack of officers feeling like the department and the political leadership has their back.
Yeah, well, I just need to say something. While it has made it more difficult because a contact card for a stop was an index card, it's now a 2-page report akin to conducting a robbery investigation.
Wow.
So in reality, it would be virtually impossible to do the same number of stops because it takes more time.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, that's not the issue. These officers know that nobody has their back. Quite frankly, what they say to me all the time when I see them on the street is they say, look, if that's what they did to you, what would they do to me? And these officers are really confused as to what they're supposed to be doing right now because, quite frankly, the Department of Justice is here investigating patterns and practices of the department and using standards that the Supreme Court would say were unconstitutional. And let me just be clear about this. The Supreme Court says that you could stop somebody based on something called articulable reasonable suspicion. Yet what we hear time and time again is the fact that we're disproportionately stopping African Americans. So they want us to use the population census and the population demographics as a standard for stopping people.
It's absurd.
So let me tell you what that means. That means in the most violent community in the city, Englewood, which is 98% African American, the expectation is that we're going to stop 32% white folks. It's preposterous. Mm-hmm. Yet these are the standards that are being used. The officers get punched in the face on video. We can't get somebody prosecuted. Yet at the same time, if they stop the wrong person, they're subject to discipline and perhaps civil or criminal liabilities. So that's what's happening. These men and women know that nobody has their back. They would be thrown under the bus, which is the quote that we hear all the time referred to what happened to me. And they're not getting out of the cars and doing the job that they used to do because nobody's got their back.
So what's your assessment of Rahm Emanuel as mayor?
I have my personal issues, obviously. It's something that really is troubling to me to have a 35-year career to reach the standard and the level that I reached, not just in my career, but in national policing. I was a leader nationally, developing best practices, working with academics, and to have the rug pulled out from underneath me when I think that I still have a lot to contribute is a personal thing for me. So I try to separate the personal from the practical. I think that there's a lot of things that I would do differently, that other people would do differently. And I think that there's a lot of room for improvement in the city of Chicago.
Are you going to stay in the city of Chicago, or have you looked for work in other towns?
No. I'm staying here. I bought a condo in River North. I just had a son. I have a 7-week-old.
Oh, congratulations.
Connor at home. Yep. And Kristen and I are staying. It's that simple. So I want to see the city succeed. My son's future is involved in it. And we can do better. But we've got to eliminate the politics in policing. We've got to stop playing the Chicago game, and we've got to do what other places are doing, which is create a meritocracy that's based upon something other than who you know, what you look like, that's based upon your work ethic and your abilities, which is what we were trying to do in the department. We had a lot of success doing it, and the whole thing has been reversed. So, that's where we are, and it doesn't have to be that way. 737 people murdered since I was fired a year ago yesterday. Doesn't have to be that way.
He is former Chicago Police Superintendent Garry McCarthy. Garry, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our Turnkey.Pro answer line.